At 6:18 on a Thursday evening, a man sat down at the bar at Lattimore's on Cahuenga in West Hollywood and asked for a glass of water. He had given his name to the host stand 11 minutes earlier. The host had smiled and said it would be just a moment. That was minute 1. In the next 46 minutes, 7 parties arrived after him and were seated before him. He did not flag anyone down. He did not approach the host stand. He ordered a second glass of water at minute 22 and said thank you when it arrived. He watched the room with the unhurried attention of someone who finds people interesting and has no particular schedule for the evening. He was still at the bar at minute 47. At minute 48, a 24-year-old server named Maya Restrepo set down her tray, walked to the bar, and said, "I can seat you now, sir, if you'd like to follow me." She had not been asked to do this. She had no authorization to do this. She had been watching a man sit at a bar for 47 minutes and had reached the limit of what she was able to watch without doing something about it. What happened after Maya sat him down would take most of the next hour. And what Leonard Voss, the general manager of Lattimore's, the man who had built this restaurant with 20 years of his own hands, did the following morning at 9 a.m. would be something none of his 12 staff members had ever seen him do. And something that none of them would forget for the rest of their careers. Lattimore's is on the east side of Cahuenga, just north of Fountain, in a space that used to be a clothing boutique, and before that a recording studio, and before that several other things. The current restaurant has been there 11 years, 12 tables, not by accident, by decision, and a bar with 8 seats, and a kitchen that sources most of its proteins within 200 miles, and a prix-fixe menu on Thursdays and Fridays that runs $185 before wine. The lighting is amber and low. The music is jazz, barely audible, the kind of choice that says we know what we are doing without saying it out loud. The glasses are heavy. The napkins are cloth. The staff moves with the ease of people who have done this long enough to make it look like nothing while being, at every moment, extremely aware of every table in the room. The clientele on a Thursday skews industry. Film, music, adjacent spheres. People for whom being seen in the right room carries professional weight. Lattimore's has been the right room for most of its 11 years. A table is not technically difficult to get, but it is the kind of not difficult that requires knowing to ask and knowing how. The table hierarchy is not written anywhere. It does not need to be. The staff understands which tables face the room and which face the wall, which ones are held for regulars and which absorb the remainder. Leonard Voss had not invented this system. It is as old as restaurants. But he had refined it into something of particular precision over 11 years. He knew, before looking at the reservation sheet, which arriving party should go where, because he had developed the judgment at the host stand, and he trusted it completely. On the night of the 47 minutes, Keanu Reeves arrived at 6:07 wearing a dark gray shirt, old jeans, and boots he had been wearing for a long time. He was alone. He had no reservation. He gave his name at the host stand to a young man who noted it down without recognition, and he was told it would be just a moment, and he said thank you, and he went to the bar. Leonard Voss had been in the restaurant industry for 33 years and running Lattimore's for 11 of them. He was 54 years old, precise in his dress and precise in his reading of rooms, with the particular alertness of someone who has been doing this long enough that it no longer requires thought. He moved through his dining room with the ease of someone moving through something he built. Because he had built it, every part of it, the concept and the menu and the kitchen staff and the clientele and the specific geometry of who sat where. He had grown up in Compton. He did not lead with this. It was not a secret. He had mentioned it in 2 press features over the years, but it was not something he narrated to his dining room. He had moved from Compton northward and westward by increments that took 22 years. A busboy at a Sizzler in Inglewood at 15, a food runner at 18, a server at 22, a floor manager at 26, an assistant GM at 29, the owner of his own place at 33. Each step had taught him something the step before it couldn't. By the time he opened Lattimore's, he understood restaurants from the floor up in a way that most owners who had never worked service could not. His mother had been a waitress. Not at Lattimore's, at a Denny's on the 105 near Imperial Highway. For 23 years, Leonard had watched her leave for work in the mornings and come back in the evenings with her feet hurting and a particular tiredness in her face that was different from the tiredness of effort. The tiredness of being invisible, of spending 8 hours in a room where people needed things from you and rarely looked up long enough to know your name. She did not complain about this. She said some people were kind and some were not, and the ones who were not kind were not worth carrying home. She said other things, too. She said every person who sat down in front of her deserved the same quality of attention. The man in the dirty work jacket and the woman in the business suit both got the same hot coffee, the same clean plate, the same care. She said this not as a philosophy, but as a standard, the way you state a standard that is simply not up for discussion. Leonard had believed this as a boy. What he had done with it over 33 years of working his way into rooms where the right table could make a reputation and the wrong one could quietly end one was something different. He had learned to read the hierarchy because the hierarchy was real and consequential. He had learned this so thoroughly that by the time he opened his own place, it was not a lesson anymore. It was how he saw. He had built a room where the right people wanted to be. He had not asked himself in some time whether his mother would have been welcome at the good tables. On the evening of November 9th, Leonard was at the host stand at 6:14 when he looked at the waiting list and saw the name. He did not know the name. He looked at the bar, at the man in the gray shirt who had been sitting there for 7 minutes. He looked at the reservation sheet, a name he recognized arriving in 12 minutes, a name that meant something in terms of the window table, which was his best table, which was going to be ready in 4 minutes. He made a decision. It took less time than that. Maya had been serving tables since 6:00, and she noticed the man at the bar the same way she noticed everything, peripherally, then more clearly. Around minute 20, she began paying closer attention. He was not doing anything notable. No phone. No book. He was watching the room with the expression of someone who finds it genuinely interesting, not studying it, not performing patience, just watching. The way you watch something you are present for. Around minute 25, she noticed that the couple who had arrived at 6:31, 24 minutes after the man at the bar, were halfway through their appetizers at table 4. Around minute 30, the party of 3 who had arrived at 6:38 were being walked to the window table. Around minute 38, she saw Carlo, the bartender, 20 years behind that bar, a man who smiled at roughly 1 in 10 things customers said to him, refill the man's water and linger for a moment, still smiling, long after the refill was done. She went to the service station and looked at the clock above the pass-through. 6:57 p.m. She counted back. He had sat down at 6:18, 39 minutes. She counted again. 47. She set down her tray. Maya walked to the bar. Sir, she picked up his water glass before he could respond. I can seat you now, if you'd like to follow me. He looked at her. He was not performing surprise. He was not grateful in the way people are grateful when they feel they have finally gotten something they were owed. He looked at her the way you look at someone who has just done something that cost them something, and you want them to know you understand what it cost. Thank you, he said. He took his jacket from the adjacent stool and followed her to table 6, south side of the room. Candlelit. A clear view of the bar. Not the best table. A good one. She set his water down and handed him the menu and was reaching for the breadbasket when she heard Leonard's voice behind her. Maya, low, precise. She turned. Leonard was standing 2 feet from the table with his GM expression, the one that meant he was holding the real conversation for a better moment. Table 6 is reserved for the Marchetti party at 7:15. I'll move him to table 9 when they arrive, she said. Table 9 is open. That is not your decision to make at this stage of service. The room had gone quieter. Not entirely. The jazz was still playing. Conversations at the other tables were still happening, but in the way that rooms go quiet when the people in them have shifted from their own business to something else. Please don't move on my account. The man's voice was easy, without urgency. I'm happy to go back to the bar. I don't want to cause a problem. I appreciate that, Leonard said. He kept his eyes on Maya. If you'll just... How long was he waiting? Everyone looked at Carlo, who had asked it from behind the bar without looking up from the counter he was wiping. 47 minutes, Carlo said. I was watching the clock. The room was completely quiet. Leonard looked at Carlo. He looked at the man at table 6, who had stopped half rising and was watching this with the same calm attention he had been using all evening. He looked at the woman at table 5, who had put her fork down. At the 2 men at the bar who had turned on their stools. If I had come in with someone you recognized, the man at table 6 said, quietly. No edge in it. A genuine question. Where would we be right now? Leonard opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The clock above the pass-through, visible through the kitchen door, read 7:01. Sit down, Leonard said. Please, the table is yours. He looked at Maya for a moment. Something passing through his expression that she would think about for a long time. And then he walked toward the back of the restaurant. The meal lasted 1 hour and 20 minutes. Maya served it. Carlo sent over a glass of something from the bar with a note he had written on a napkin that simply said on me, which was not something Carlo had authorization to do either, and which nobody mentioned. At 8:43, the man at table 6 finished, and Maya brought the check. She found a note on top of it in Leonard's handwriting. The meal is on the house. She brought it back. He looked at the note. I'm going to pay for it, he said. Is Mr. Voss in the back? Leonard's office was behind the kitchen, a small room with a desk, 2 chairs, a whiteboard of inventory numbers, and a shelf. On the shelf was a photograph that had been there since Lattimore's opened. His mother, at the counter of the Denny's on the 105, in her uniform, taken sometime in the mid-90s by a regular customer who had sent her a copy. She had given Leonard a copy when he opened his place. He had put it on the shelf on the first day and had not moved it in 11 years. He had also, somewhere in the past 11 years, stopped quite seeing it. He heard the knock. He said, "Come in." The man from table 6 sat down in the chair across from the desk with the ease of someone who does not need chairs to be offered. He looked at the room, at the whiteboard, at the shelf. "I want to thank you for what you did out there," he said. Leonard looked at him. "I kept you waiting 47 minutes. You also sent out a meal I am going to think about for a while. That is not the same thing." "No," the man said. "It is not." They sat with that for a moment. "I want to say something," the man said. "And I am saying it because I think it is the true thing, not because I want to make you feel bad. I watched this room for 47 minutes. I watched who got seated and where and when. I watched who got the window table and who got the corner and what the difference was between them. As far as I could tell." He paused. I don't think it was personal. I think it was just the system you have built. The one where some people count and some people wait. Another pause. And I think you built it because you understand that system better than most people do. Because you watched your mother on the other side of it for 23 years. Leonard went very still. I know what it is, the man said. To walk into rooms and have what's available to you depend entirely on what someone has decided you are worth before you open your mouth. There were years when how I was treated in a restaurant depended on what was opening at the box office that Friday. I understand the physics of it from the inside. A pause. You learn to see the hierarchy clearly when you are standing outside of it. And then, if you are not careful, you learn to use it the same way it was used on you. Leonard looked at the shelf, at the photograph, at his mother in her uniform, the counter behind her, the particular uprightness of how she stood even in a photograph taken at the end of a shift. She set the table at home the same way she set them at work, he said. She used the good dishes on Tuesdays. She said everyone deserves to feel like they matter. He stopped. She said it like it was simply a fact. It is a fact, the man said. It is just not an easy one to hold on to. Leonard was quiet. There is a young woman who works for you, the man said. Maya. She sat me down tonight without being asked. She did it because it was the right thing and she had been watching the wrong thing happen for 47 minutes, and she decided she had watched long enough. He looked at Leonard. She is going to be very good at this if you give her the room to be. She is also going to leave if the job does not become the job she believes it should be. Leonard looked at the photograph for a moment. What would she say? The man asked. If she walked in here tonight and watched how the tables were being assigned. Your mother. What would she say? Leonard closed his eyes for a long moment. She would not say anything, he said. She would just look at me. The man across from him stood. He put his hand on the corner of the desk, briefly, the way you touch something when you want the weight of the gesture to stay behind. The meal was genuinely excellent, he said. Please let me pay for it. He walked out. Leonard sat in the office with the whiteboard and the inventory numbers and the photograph for 11 minutes. Then he walked out to the dining room. The last tables were finishing. Maya was running a closing check. Carlo was behind the bar. The sounds from the kitchen were winding down. Leonard stood near the host stand and looked at the room. At the table hierarchy he had built and maintained and refined over 11 years. At the chairs. At the geometry of all of it, who sat where. What that meant. What system was underneath it. He stood there for a while. Maya, she looked up from table 2. Come here for a second. She walked to the host stand. He said, what you did tonight was not authorized. You seated a guest without my direction, and you contradicted me in front of the dining room. He paused. It was also the right thing. Both of those things are true, and I want you to know I understand both of them. Maya looked at him. I want you at 9 a.m. tomorrow, he said. Tell Carlo. Tell Priya. I am going to talk to the full staff. He looked at the room once more. I have something I need to say. At 9 the following morning, 12 people sat or stood among the tables of Lattimore's, the chairs still upside down on most of them except the ones Leonard had left right side up. He had no notes. He told them what had happened the night before in plain terms, not the name, which he still did not know, but the sequence. A man arrived, gave his name at the host stand, sat at the bar for 47 minutes while others were seated ahead of him, and was finally seated by Maya at minute 48. He said this was not an isolated incident. He said he had been making decisions like this, in subtler ways, across 11 years of service. He said he had told himself those decisions were necessary, and he was no longer going to tell himself that. Then he said one other thing. He told them about his mother. Not everything, just the shape of it. The Denny's on the 105. 23 years, the invisibility that came home with her in the evenings, and which she never complained about, and which he had watched from the time he was 6. The standard she held, stated as a fact rather than a philosophy: everyone who sits down in front of you deserves the same quality of attention. He said she had a rule. The man in the work jacket and the woman in the business suit, the regular and the stranger. The person who looked like money and the person who didn't. Same coffee, same clean plate, same care. He said, starting today, so do we. He told them the specific change. The next person waiting is the next person seated. No VIP holds at the host stand. No table management by optics or social calculation. No judgments about who warrants which seat. 12 tables, first come, first seated, and if a regular wants to guarantee their table, they make a reservation. He said this would cost the restaurant some things. Some regulars would go somewhere they felt more important. Some nights the room would not look the way it had been looking. He said he was willing to carry that. He was looking at Maya when he said the last part. She was looking at the table in front of her. Then she looked up, and he held her eyes for a moment. Then he said, set up for service. Some regulars did leave. 3 in the first month who had relied on the window table being available without a reservation, and who arrived one evening to find it occupied by a couple who had simply arrived first. They went elsewhere. Leonard noted their departure and did not chase it. Other things happened. A food writer who had been trying to get a table at Lattimore's for 2 years arrived on a Tuesday without a reservation and was seated in 8 minutes. She wrote about the food, which had always been excellent, and also about something else. A quality in the room she found difficult to name, but described as the particular ease of a place that has stopped performing its own importance. The piece ran in March. Reservations that month increased by 41% over the same month the year before. The Marchetti party, the regulars whose table Maya had promised to table 9 on the night of the 47 minutes, came back 2 weeks later and were seated at table 9 as she had said. They did not comment on the change. They ordered what they always ordered. They stayed 2 hours. They have kept coming back. The photograph of Leonard's mother moved from the office shelf to the wall in the hallway between the kitchen and the dining room, the narrow passage that every staff member walked at the start and end of every shift. He did not label it. Nobody asked him to explain it. They could tell what it meant by where he had put it. Maya stayed at Lattimore's for another 20 months. Not because she felt obligation, she had other offers, but because she wanted to see what the place was becoming. And then she saw it, and she knew she could go. She took a position running front of house at a new room in Silver Lake, 40 seats, which she helped design before it opened. On the first day of staff training, she told every server and host one rule: the next person waiting is the next person seated. She said it the way her mother's people said things that were simply true, not as a policy, but as a fact that was not available for negotiation. She said it came from a place she used to work. She left it at that. The staff learned it and kept it, and some of them, years later, carried it to the rooms they eventually ran. Leonard put his mother's photograph on the wall and kept it there. He had conversations with his staff that he had not had before. Not training conversations, not performance conversations, but the kind where he admitted something and then asked something back. He found, in those conversations, people he had not quite been paying attention to. A prep cook who had been trying to tell him something about the kitchen culture for 2 years. A host who had been absorbing the table judgments as instructions about how the world worked. He listened to both of them. He changed specific things based on what they said. He also did one thing he had not planned and did not announce. He put a small placard on the host stand, not facing the room, facing the person behind it. 4 words, in the same plain font as the menu. His mother's rule, the way she had said it. Everyone deserves to feel like they matter. It was not decorative. It was instruction. Every person who stood at that host stand read it before they read anything else. 3 years after the evening of the 47 minutes, a culinary student named Desmond, 21, serving his required front-of-house internship, spent 4 months bussing tables at Lattimore's. He was not a server. He was there to understand how a room ran before he ran one. What he observed in those 4 months he described, years later, as the first time he understood that a restaurant is not the food. The food, he wrote, is what you remember when you are eating it. The room is what you carry. He described a narrow hallway. A photograph. A woman in a uniform standing at a counter with her back straight. A long shift behind her, and probably another one ahead. He described 4 words on a placard at a host stand. He said those 4 words were on a placard at his own host stand, 17 years later, in a restaurant he had built. He said he had not needed to think about whether to put them there. He said some things are obvious once you have been shown them. I have been thinking about what 47 minutes is. In most contexts, 47 minutes is not a significant span of time. It is a commute. A meeting that ran long. The second half of something you were not sure about yet. But in a restaurant, at a bar, watching 7 parties arrive after you and be escorted to tables while you sit with your water and your patience. 47 minutes is enough time to understand something about a place. About what it values, about who it has decided deserves to be inside it. Most people would have said something at minute 15, at minute 25, would have walked to the host stand and asked a simple, reasonable question. I understand that impulse completely. I would have felt it. What I keep returning to is the choice to wait without performing the waiting. No sighing, no pointed looks. No laying the groundwork for an eventual scene. Just sitting at the bar and watching the room and finding it interesting and saying thank you for the water and being as present in minute 47 as in minute 1. I don't know how many of us can do that. Stay soft inside a situation that is treating you as though your time is worth less than someone else's. That is not passivity. The man was not passive. He saw exactly what was happening. It is something more specific. It is the refusal to let someone else's bad behavior become the temperature of the room. And then I think about Leonard Voss at 9 in the morning in front of 12 people who work for him, telling them about a photograph they had not been told to look at, and a rule his mother held that he had stopped holding, and what he was going to do differently. Not a policy memo. Not a value statement, just one person in front of other people, saying, I was doing this wrong. Here is where that came from. Here is what changes now. I think about what that costs. Most of us, when we realize we have been wrong in some systemic, long-running way, adjust privately. We shift the behavior and we tell ourselves the shift is what counts, that there is no need to name what it was before. And sometimes that is true. But I wonder sometimes whether the naming is part of what makes the change real, whether saying it out loud to the people who were inside the thing with you is the part that actually changes the room, rather than just changing you. 12 people heard Leonard that morning. Each of them carried something out of that room and into every room after it. Maya carried it to Silver Lake. Desmond carried it to wherever he eventually stood. None of this was planned. It started with a man who sat at a bar for 47 minutes and said thank you for the water. That is how most of the things that matter actually start. This story is fictional, inspired by Keanu Reeves's well-known reputation for patience and decency in situations that would diminish most people. Drop a comment, not about what you thought of the story, but about a moment when someone's patience in an unfair situation changed something for the people around them. Those moments deserve to be said out loud. If someone in your life needs to hear this today, send it to them. You know who that is. Subscribe for more stories like this one. See you in the next one.